Senator King, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business on Senate Bill 1208.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, there's been an incredible rise in incidents across the state of individuals obstructing peace officers, emergency medical personnel, and public officials from safely performing their duties. The behavior raises concerns about law enforcement safety and effectiveness, and also their ability to protect the public. When an individual interferes, and we're not talking about just speech here, we're talking about direct interference, when they disrupt or impede a peace officer's work, it hinders the officer's ability to maintain order and to respond to the emergencies that they're attempting to respond to. It is crucial to address this issue to allow our first responders to serve their communities safely. In Tarrant County, I know of one individual who's been arrested 8 times for obstructing peace officers responding to emergencies. SB1208 seeks to deter this behavior, which has a low criminal penalty now, by increasing the penalty for the offense of interference with a peace officer's or a public official's public duties. It increases it from a Class B misdemeanor to a state jail felony. And with that, I would move to suspend the regular order of business.
Senator Eckhart, for what purpose?
To ask questions of the author.
Senator King, do you yield?
Certainly.
Senator, are you aware of the Antonio Buehler case that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court?
Tell me the facts if it rings a...
Antonio Buehler was a combat veteran who also was an Ivy League graduate, I believe in economics. And he began recording activity of police officers on public streets in downtown Austin. Are you aware of his case?
You know, I may be. I've read a number of the cases, and in fact, if you go to just YouTube channel, you can see, because a lot of them record their activities when they're doing this, and then they are paid to post them. So there's a lot of examples on YouTube. In fact, they use that for law enforcement training now. So I don't know all the specific details.
Antonio Buehler was at a gas station when he saw a police officer arresting a woman, and he started videotaping the arrest. He was arrested himself for interfering with the lawful order of a police officer. His case was later dismissed. In fact, the federal court found that he had a right, that citizens have a right to, for instance, record the behavior of government officials in their, in their open capacity. Do you agree with that right?
Yes, and in fact, the bill very specifically does not interfere with free speech. These are not activities such as that sounds like it was, where the person did not commit the crime of interference. This addresses raising the penalty where someone was rightfully convicted of of committing that offense. The case you described, apparently they did not commit the offense.
So Mr. Buehler, I believe, was arrested 5 more subsequent times for videoing police activity on public streets. And he appealed, but because his criminal cases were still pending, his case was dismissed and never reached the U.S. Supreme Court. His civil case.
So I'm sorry what the question, I think what you're asking is, do I recognize that someone can be exercising their free speech rights? Someone can be videoing officers, or someone operating an emergency medical, vehicle, or other public officials doing their job. Can they video those? Can they yell across the street at them? Can they do things like that? Yes, they can do that without even coming near violating the interference law. The interference law is very specific, and it's an aggressive action that literally prohibits the officer or the emergency medical personnel or the firefighter, whoever it may be, from performing their duties. And in fact, in many cases, it not only prevents them from performing their duties, but when you're trying to intervene in a dangerous situation, maybe it's a robbery, maybe it's a drug bust, maybe it's a gang fight, whatever it is, and you're trying to calm and deal with that very dangerous situation, and you have the risk of the need that you may need to use force of some nature, and if you have a third party that's directly interfering in that to the point that you cannot perform your duties, it not only puts the officer or the firefighter or the medical personnel at risk, but it puts the people at risk of something going wrong in that incident that the officers could have prevented from occurring. So yes, free speech is protected just like it is under the current statute. The statute has not changed. All we're doing is saying there's such an incredible rise in the number of these incidents, a lot of which people are paid for doing. And there's such an incredible rise that a Class B misdemeanor is not acting, and it's not an enhanceable Class B misdemeanor. It can't be bumped up to Class A on the second or third time. That's why the one person in Tarrant County has had 8 arrests for that, and yet none of them can be enhanced. And so what it's doing is taking it from a maximum penalty of 180 days for a Class B misdemeanor to a state jail felony where it has a minimum of 180 days, maximum of up to 2 years, but of course those can have deferred adjudication and also probation and other things, community supervision prior to going to jail.
So it's very interesting that you raised that. It's true, it's not enhanceable as a misdemeanor. So Mr. Bueller was repeatedly arrested for a misdemeanor because the cops were mad that he kept recording them. So they eventually arrested him for assault of a peace officer alleging that he had spit on them so that they could get a state jail felony and thereby have his federal civil rights lawsuit kicked out because he had a pending state jail felony. And the court ruled that his state jail felony had to be resolved before he could bring his case back. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that specific case, the facts in it, no.
So under existing case law, there is a standing provision that if a person has a state jail felony, they can't get their civil rights reviewed until that case is resolved.
And what would be wrong with that?
It means that in what is a misdemeanor interference will now be a state jail felony interference.
Correct.
And it needs to be resolved at the trial court level before you can bring a civil action for having your rights violated.
You're right. I don't know all the details of that case, and it sounds like it was actually several cases that went way up an appellate side, maybe on the criminal, maybe on a civil side as well. What I do know is this, is that you talk to any police officer, any firefighter, any emergency medical personnel, anywhere in the state of Texas, and they will tell you that this problem is increasing dramatically, as I mentioned, some people are actually getting paid for the more postings they do, they get a following, that type of thing, but it's increasing, it's placing not only our government personnel, our first responders in danger, but it's placing the people they're trying to deal with in even greater danger. And when you have these third-party interferences. So again, I don't know of that case. I do know of hundreds of others of incidents that are occurring across our state, and it increases, and it's a bad situation, and the Class B misdemeanor is obviously not deterring it, so the only common sense thing you can do is bump up the punishment and hope that that begins to be a deterrent. The other nice thing about bumping it up, when you get to a state jail felony, you had a lot of other options that you can do to try to deal with that person, from community supervision to a number of other things that may not be available for a simple Class B non-enhanceable offense.
You think community supervision isn't available for a Class B?
No, I know it can be, but other things aren't necessarily available that are available with parole and probation and other things.
So are you aware of a 17-year-old homeschooled child in Wichita Falls who is going into public buildings like their library, their post office, and their local federal court and videotaping?
Not aware of that homeschool student.
Are you aware that that 17-year-old was recently detained for being in a federal courthouse recording? Do you think he should be vulnerable to a state jail felony?
Don't know the facts, but it may have been necessary to detain him. He may have been acting suspiciously. They may have been concerned he was doing something that was going to place the public at risk. I don't have any idea of those facts.
I'll send you the article.
Okay, great. What I do know is you talk to any law enforcement officer in the state of Texas, and they will tell you that people's lives, including their own, are being endangered at an ever-increasing rate, and whatever we're doing today with Class B misdemeanors is not correcting the problem.
Can a peace officer arrest on a Class B misdemeanor?
Yes.
So a peace officer in the moment can detain, arrest, and have taken to booking a person who is engaged in interfering with the lawful order of a peace officer.
Yes, and I mentioned
whether it's a misdemeanor or a state jail felony.
And I mentioned that one person in Tarrant County alone who's been arrested 8 times for what were very serious interference circumstances.
8 times, 180 days consecutive?
Again, all I can tell you is it is a problem that is ever increasing. It is placing law enforcement, it is placing firefighters, it is placing emergency medical personnel, and it is placing the public in grave jeopardy. And what we are doing today is not working. And so the effort is, and this was actually brought to me by the Tarrant County DA's office, the effort is let's try enhancing the penalty and see if with the options of a state jail felony, the concern that will bring of having a higher penalty, but also the other things you can do to intervene at that level, and see if we can't make a dent in this and get it stopped.
Well, just for the record, on one of those arrests of Antonio Bueller, it was Justin Berry who arrested him. Thank you for answering my questions.
Senator West, for what purpose?
Question of the author.
Senator King, do you yield?
Certainly.
I appreciated the exchange between you and Senator Eckhart. I just want to make certain that we're real clear on this, because if for some reason a citizen is arrested because they are taping an incident that an officer is involved in, that's not interfering with that officer, correct?
That's correct. In fact, there is a defense to prosecution, which functions like an affirmative defense, as you know, a defense to prosecution to the statute that says that conduct intended to warn a person operating motor vehicle of the presence of a peace officer is not a violation, nor is the interruption, disruption, impediment, or interference consisting only of speech. So speech alone does not violate the offense of interference.
Okay, let's make sure, again, speech alone does not violate. So do you consider, if I were to say that you're a police officer and you're engaged in arresting someone and I had my video camera out?
Well, the penal code actual wording says for interference with public duties, a person commits an offense if the person with criminal negligence, as the mens rea, interrupts, disrupts, impedes, or otherwise interferes with a peace officer while the peace officer is performing a duty or exercising authority. And again, it has that affirmative defense that it cannot be
So you don't
speech.
consider, if I'm videotaping, is that disrupting, is that violating that statute in any way?
Mere videotaping would not violate the statute.
Okay, so if for some reason this issue comes up and a citizen is arrested by a police officer for doing that, I want to make certain that we take this conversation and put it on a journal so someone would be able to use that as what your intent is as it relates to this particular offense.
So,
You're okay with that, aren't you?
yes, I agree with that, but I want to clarify that I'm not changing the interference statute. So the mens rea and the actus reus, the mental state and the criminal act are not being changed that together constitute the offense.
What you're doing,
All I'm doing is enhancing
changing the penalty. You're changing the penalty. And
Yes.
so from that vantage point, I want to make certain it's not your intent in changing the penalty. To make certain that if a citizen is videotaping a police officer that's arresting someone, that that's not considered to be interfering with the police officer and in violation of this particular statute. So the person
Yeah.
would be then eligible for a state jail felony. That's what I'm trying to make certain of.
Right, and you are correct in saying that I'm not doing anything that changes the statute itself, the mens rea or the actus reus. I am enhancing the penalty, and I agree with you that under the statute, as it is now and as it would be if the bill passes, that simply videotaping an officer or simply speaking to an officer does not constitute, under the statute, interference with someone performing public duties.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Hinojosa of Hidalgo, for what purpose?
Will Senator King yield?
King will yield.
Yes, certainly.
Thank you, Mr. President. And, Senator King, we had this bill come out of the Criminal Justice Committee, and we heard quite a bit of testimony. And from the testimony and your bill itself, it is very clear that a citizen can videotape a police officer.
Absolutely.
As long as they don't interfere with the duty of the police officer. And in testimony that we heard, somebody like Mr. Bueller, for example, they were, quite frankly, in the face of the police officer. And they were harassing the police officer, even when they were told to please step away. And those are the type of cases we're trying to address with Senate Bill 1208. Is that not correct?
That's exactly correct. And again, if you look at some of the videos that are on YouTube that have been posted with this, that the law enforcement now uses in training, this is a very aggressive instance of someone getting in the face of, getting in the middle of that activity. They're searching someone, they're searching a vehicle, and preventing that officer from doing their job. It's a very aggressive intervention. It's not just standing 20 feet away yelling at them, and it's certainly not just holding a camera and video and the officer doing the search or whatever they're doing.
And the Class B misdemeanor right now just has not been a deterrence in keeping some of those very aggressive people that are more interested in your face type of tactics against police.
Yes, and sometimes things like that devolve into someone having to be arrested, and it becomes a resisting arrest and it gets out of hand. The intent here is that increasing the penalty will be an effort, hopefully it works, to deter people from doing this, because apparently right now they're just not really worried about a Class B misdemeanor.
And many times, right after they get arrested, they're let out, and they'll be right back in the street again, harassing, interfering with other police officers. And
that's right, because the bonding process and everything involving a felony versus involving a Class B misdemeanor is completely different.
Thank you, Senator King, for answering my questions.
Thank you, sir.
Senator King moves suspension of the regular order of business on Senate Bill 1208. There is objection. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell,
26 ayes, 5 nays. Rules are suspended. Chair lays out on second reading Senate Bill 1208. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 1208 relating to increasing the criminal penalty for the offense of interference with public duties.
Senator King, you're recognized for a motion.
Move passage to engrossment.
Senator King moves passage to engrossment. There is objection. The Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Cook, Creighton, Eckhart, Flores.
There be 26 ayes and 5 nays. The bill is passed to engrossment. Senator King, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
So move.
Senator King moves suspension of the 3-day rule. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
26 ayes, 5 nays. The rules are suspended. Chair lays out on third reading and final passage Senate Bill 1208. Senator King, you recognize the Secretary read the caption.
Senate Bill 1208 relating to increasing the criminal penalty for the offense of interference with public duties.
Senator King, you recognized for a motion.
Move final passage.
Senator King moves final passage of Senate Bill 1208. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Cook, Creighton.
26 ayes, 5 nays. Bill is finally passed. Congratulations, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members.